In today's video, we have lots of NHL news and rumors to take a look at. In the rumor mill today, we're focusing on some trade talk around teams like Montreal, Edmonton, and the New York Rangers. Plus, we also have some updates on the Detroit Red Wings, and their big two RFAs remain unsigned, and Mo Seider and Lucas Raymond. Plus, we have some very interesting comments from Evgeny Kuznetsov and why he struggled so much towards the end of his time in the NHL. Also some very interesting comments from former San Jose Sharks general manager Doug Wilson, and regarding Joe Pavelski vacating the team and heading to Dallas for the last number of years of his career. A lot more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about today. Not a whole lot when it comes to player movement. The only new details that emerged today is former NHL, AHL defenseman Brady, who last was signed with the Montreal Canadiens. He is heading over to play in Europe. He signed over in Slovakia on a one-year deal. So he last appeared for Laval last year, 22 games played. He's been a part of 2 or 3 different NHL organizations. I know he was with the Canucks for a while as well, and struggled to kind of establish himself as a regular, and had dealt with some injuries as well. So Keeper heads over to play in Slovakia next year. As we mentioned as well, get some very interesting comments from a couple of former NHL people, one being Evgeny Kuznetsov and, of course, former Sharks GM Doug Wilson. So Evgeny Kuznetsov, let's start with him. Of course, we know now that he's going to play in the KHL. It's likely where he's going to finish his career. He signed a 4-year contract to head over there. We know that the last 2 or 3 years in Washington really weren't great on the ice and off the ice, had his fair share of issues. Then, of course, he ended up finishing with the Carolina Hurricanes. Did okay there. Like, I thought it wasn't, considering he was new to the team, needed a fresh start and everything like that, I honestly thought it was, fair to say that his time there was okay. It was, could they have kept him? Sure, but they could certainly very much use the cap space. But really, I mean, it's not like they forced him out or anything like that. He had decided that it was best for him to terminate that contract and to head over to Russia and play in the KHL. Obviously, that had to be mutually agreed upon. They could not, make that decision for him because he hadn't done anything to justify being terminated for cause. But Kuznetsov did reveal in his last bit of time in the NHL, and it doesn't, not real clear exactly how long this was going on, but when he was in the NHLPA assistance program, that it was largely around struggles with rheumatoid arthritis. And now he was definitely taking medication, dealing with that. I don't know if all the medication obviously was proper or legal or anything of those natures. But at the end of the day, we know now that he's off the medication. He's been, free of pills for 3 months and is feeling a lot better. And it feels like it's best for him to play in Russia. But, clearly he also made an interesting comment saying that no one really believed him. And even it sounded like the Capitals organization really didn't know what to make of that situation and weren't really buying it. We know that he did have a history of having some issues with different substances. So, I guess sometimes maybe your reputation exceeds itself and it kind of makes it less likely to be believed, I guess, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to listen to. I mean, to know that he was struggling with a legit medical condition and struggled to get help and was probably maybe not dealing with it in the best way on his own. That's kind of my take from that. Ultimately, like I said, it's nice to hear that he's, medication free now, for 3 months, feeling much better and ready to resume playing hockey and obviously, finish up his time as a pro hockey player in Russia. But, obviously it's unfortunate to know that he was struggling with that type of stuff towards the end of his NHL time, and certainly had an impact on him for sure. I mean, really, if you look back at 2018, when Washington was winning the Stanley Cup, he was huge for them. Then after that, it was a slow decline. You could probably say that the COVID season, when they came back after everything was shut down, it was pretty well a downward spiral from there. That's what it certainly sounded like. If you kind of followed everything closely. So at the end of the day, I understand there's definitely parts of that were pretty challenging on athletes and people in general, but it's nice to hear that he's cleaned up. But some interesting information that we didn't really know before. Also, some interesting comments in a recent interview from former San Jose Sharks general manager Doug Wilson. Now, Wilson was at the helm of the Sharks for a long time. Ended up eventually resigning because he was having some health issues, and it's good to know now that his health is in a much better place. Last we had heard about it, but he recently did an interview with Sheng Peng, the beat writer for the Sharks for NBC Sports. And one thing that I found interesting, they talked about the departure of Joe Pavelski from San Jose. And he now, looking back on things, says that was a huge mistake. At the end of the day, like, he feels like they should have found a way to get it done to keep Pavelski in the organization. Now, ultimately, looking at the direction of the team after that, I mean, he was one of the first bigger names to leave. We're kind of starting to see the end of the road there, so to speak, right? You're seeing guys like Pavelski and Thornton and Marleau all kind of, start to move on. And, if he would have stayed, would he have had a chance to have those deep playoff runs and lots of action like he did with the Dallas Stars? Probably not. So I don't know if there's any, regrets on Pavelski's part, but certainly he was a long shot to make the NHL, being such a late pick. But he defied the odds, and they joked about that in the article, saying that how smart they were to pick him. And he's like, well, considering how late we picked him, we can't be that smart, right? Like, we almost didn't take him. And then they did, and it worked out quite nicely. Ultimately ended up having a solid, one of the better careers amongst U.S.-born players. Certainly, if you look at his era of playing, like, he's one of the best. Put up phenomenal stats. He's one of the best at tipping pucks in front of the net, like net front presence, even though he's not a big guy. He was certainly really, really strong at that. But, I kind of wish more general managers, especially when they're done with the team, or especially when they're older and done with the game. And a lot of these guys tend to stay in the game until they're quite older, really. I like to see more of them talk about the stories and write books and kind of, help us get inside of what was going on with teams at particular times. Tell us about the trades that you discussed, but maybe, didn't happen, that came close, that would have reshaped the team or really shaken up the league, or, deals that you really thought you were proud of, deals you really regret, players that got away. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that I'd love to hear from more NHL GMs talk about this kind of stuff and kind of, share their moments and kind of tell the stories. I really think it would help the game myself. There's not a lot of GMs that have done that. Now, there's one book I'm actually reading now. I actually got it as a Christmas present, but I hadn't really had a lot of time to get to it until just recently. But Doug McLean, of course, is also an Atlantic Canadian like myself, so I wanted to support him. But obviously, a great NHL executive, had a long-time GM of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Obviously worked with a few other teams as well. Was linked to Brian Murray there for a long time. And then with his book now that's out, it's called Draft Day, and he does a lot of stories, from the draft. And it's not all of it revolves around his team, but different things he's heard around the league. Obviously involved other people, and so far I'm still in the early stages of the book, but it's really good and interesting. So I'd just like to see more of that, to be honest, and hopefully we see a different trend over time. But some interesting comments there and a couple of scenarios that, I guess we didn't really know how Wilson felt. We certainly didn't know what Kuznetsov was dealing with previously either. Now, onto the rumor front, we're going to take a look at a few different articles. A lot of today's news comes from The Athletic, and some of these are pieces, too, that, one of the Detroit stuff is actually from MLive.com and Answer Con. We'll start with that, because that's not really trade-related. That's more like the rumors and latest intel around the contracts for some of the big RFAs. We've been slowly picking away here the last week in each video and trying to find, at least, because there's still a fair bit of number of prominent RFAs that are needing new contracts, right? We've talked about Jeremy Swayman. We've talked a bit about Seth Jarvis. We've kind of touched on these two before, but it's been a while. But, Mo Seider and Lucas Raymond both remain unsigned, as well as Jonathan Berggren as well. Not that he's a nobody, because he is another player there. Obviously doesn't play as big of a role as the other two, but, they're going to be, hopefully, if it works out, get long-term lucrative deals. So it's interesting to monitor things. And the article from Answer Con kind of, asking the question, should Red Wings fans be concerned? Is there any reason to be worried or panicking right now because the deals are not done? And ultimately, he says, like anybody, I think any writer right now, if they're asking about restricted free agents that are not signed, it's going to be no. Yes, we're into August now, but we're still quite a few weeks from training camp. Once you start hitting that, once September rolls around, then it's like, okay, then you start to get worried. If they don't get something done soon, they're going to miss training camp, right? And if they miss training camp, that really sets them back. We've seen a number of players go through it. A lot of them can, obviously get signed afterwards and come back and still have an okay season, sometimes even very good seasons. But it is tough if they miss all of camp and the first little bit of the NHL campaign. It's not easy. And more often than not, there's some exceptions that they do tend to have slower starts or struggle until they get everything up to speed. It just takes time. So for Detroit, a team that, you're looking at like Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa, like those teams, especially in the Atlantic, that last year were the teams we were kind of monitoring closely, looking to make a big step and get in the playoffs. They don't need a situation where they're both not signed going into camp or into the season. They need to be able to start on time and get a good start, because like we've talked about before, especially in terms of the Senators the last couple of years, like you may not be able to win the Stanley Cup in October or November, but you sure as heck can lose your right to play for it in that time if you have a bad start. And the Sens have had bad starts. That's been a trend that they need to correct this year. They need to have a better start. And they've had times, even though they were not necessarily out of the playoffs, they had to play much better, and it puts a lot of pressure on them to really improve. In the last 2 years, 2 years ago was actually a little bit better than last year. They got a lot closer to the playoffs, and we're certainly really good down the stretch at the end of the year, making it interesting. But if they could have been just even 2-3 wins better in that first 2 months, they would have taken the pressure off a little bit. It makes a huge difference. It really does. And for Detroit, who made some strides last year and got closer but didn't get in, same with Buffalo, you can't have that be the reason why it doesn't set things back again, right? Because fans are getting antsy for playoff action. The organization's getting antsy to move the step forward. And if that's the reason that you miss is because these two guys missed a bunch of time because no contracts, that's not a good look. That's more on the organization than it is anybody else. But at the end of the day, the pressure point's really not going to be until we get to training camp. He also goes on to say that it's pretty clear that based on what he's seen, heard, and what makes total sense is that there's no reason to think that anybody on the Red Wings is going to make more money than Dylan Larkin. Dylan Larkin is the team's probably best all-around player, captain, leader, been there the longest. Obviously, lots of other guys are close as far as their talent level, importance, and all that kind of stuff. But there's no reason to think that anybody right now is in a predicament or spot to make more than Larkin. So if you take that out of the picture, it's not going to be more than that. But he also goes on to say that Seider, it wouldn't be shocking if Mo Seider was done first. Not to say that he's more important than Raymond, but typically when you're looking at locking up your top players, your top defenseman, your top centerman, Raymond's a winger. Not that he's not important, but it's just Seider's probably going to end up making a little bit more. I think he can command a bit more money than Raymond, so getting the bigger one done first probably makes sense. Doesn't mean it's for sure going to happen that way, but that's his theory and opinion here, that we're probably going to see him done first, which could come in around $8 million or so, which would make sense. Maybe it could be more than 8, but it's just 8+ range is kind of where we are led to believe it's going to be, and that Raymond will probably come in, anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million less. So makes sense that you're probably looking at shouldn't be more than $16 million, or right around there for both players. But of course, you get Berggren too. He's unsigned. There's been a lot of talk about him maybe being a trade piece, so it's unclear where things stand there. I mean, that should be an easier deal to get done. So that one's I'm more curious about. But ultimately, when Yzerman's been asked about it, and it's been a bit because everything's been very quiet. He said, they're working on it, but it's been a while since we really had any, immediate availability or any, real comments on those scenarios. So clearly, is it a big deal? Is it a need to worry yet? No, but we get to training camp, or once we're getting close to training camp, if it's not done, like I said, to me, if I'm Yzerman, I want these done before we get to camp for sure. I don't want them missing any time, because then it's me as the GM that's on the hook to be like, I answered everybody, the ownership, the fan base, and why are these guys not signed? If they miss the start of the season, those are huge pieces, right? So we'll see where that goes, but those are the numbers we're probably looking at if everything goes well and they get their long-term deals. If they can't agree on the long-term deals and they have to bridge them, then you're probably looking at anywhere from a 1 to 3 year deal for obviously less money. So we'll see where things work out, but that's the latest intel on the Red Wings situation. On the Rangers, again, article from Peter Ball, The Athletic, looking at a mailbag type article here, answering some questions. And one thing that I knew that he wanted big money, but he gives us the thoughts on an Igor Shesterkin extension. And wow, according to Peter Baugh, he's looking for a whopper of a deal. And it just kind of makes you wonder, will the Rangers go there? Is there any chances, the negotiations are going to go sour to the point that they have to look at a trade? That would be, massive for this team. If you take a look at Igor Shesterkin's importance to the Rangers, he is such a critical piece there. If they couldn't come to terms, that would be massive. But Peter Baugh's assumption here, based on everything that he's heard, says that he believes Igor Shesterkin is very unlikely to look for a hometown discount, and he's going to be wanting somewhere around 14% of the cap. And if you look at previous big goalie contracts, I guess it would make sense that it might be a comparable percentage. 14% of the cap would be close to $13 million. That's big money. If you look at the highest paid goalie in the league right now, being Bobrovsky, then look at the Price contract, look at the Vasilevsky contracts, they're all kind of close. That would eclipse them all by like $2 million. That's substantial. But it's also been quite a period of time since any of those deals have been signed, right? Look at Bobrovsky's signed a 7-year deal. He's only got a couple of years left. The Price contract certainly aging, obviously hasn't played in a while, but that's from quite some time ago. And obviously looking at, the Vasilevsky contracts from a couple of years back as well. And then you look at Ilya Sorokin, obviously being a comparable as well, fellow Russian goalie, similar age. But that's some big bucks right there. Hard to say. I would think that extension is going to take some time to come together. They would have a really tough time with the cap getting that in. We know that there's a possibility of Trouba moving on after the season, and that would free up some money. But then they also get extensions for like Lafreniere and Miller. Heedle's not signed long term. What's his situation like? It really creates some question marks. And one of the other questions in the mailbag article as well was the future of Artemi Panarin, kind of complaining about the fact that Panarin's offense doesn't seem to translate as well in the playoffs. And, you kind of hear the same thing from Leaf fans about Mitch Marner. But ultimately, when you look at the stats, they're not that bad. But not so much this past year, but the year before, I found in the playoffs, Panarin looked really off to me and was a big reason why the Rangers didn't go further. This year, I think he was better. So I'm not really convinced that he's part of the problem there by any means. He also has a full no-move clause. So Peter Ball goes on to say that he thinks Panarin trade would be highly unlikely, has a full no-move clause, and would be a deal that would probably be impossible to win, given the fact that you'd have to talk to Panarin, get teams that he would maybe consider waiving, and lose all your leverage. So unlikely, very unlikely that Panarin get moved. He still has a few years on his contract as well. Of course, him and Bobrovsky left Columbus and signed those big 7-year free agent contracts in the same offseason, same day, if I'm not mistaken, quite some time ago now. So ultimately, yeah, Panarin's not going anywhere, but Shesterkin, I wouldn't think he would. But if he's looking for that kind of money, I would be a little bit worried. Because it's not that I don't think he's top goalie in the league or one of them, but it's going to be really tough to cough that up. So we'll see where things end up there. But we're quite a ways off, of course, from having to hit the panic button on a Shesterkin trade. But we're like I said, we're not there yet. But it's something to watch for sure. Now, the other day, a couple days ago, or 2-3 days ago, I can't remember exactly what day it was because all my videos seem to mush together here in my head. But recently, in the last few days, we looked at an Oilers-based article in The Athletic written by Ellen Mitchell, looking at some right-shot defenseman targets for the Edmonton Oilers. And I didn't talk about them all in that video. I just kind of want to expand on that here today. We talked about Rasmus Andersson. Could we see a Battle of Alberta trade? It's happened before. It's rare. Obviously remember James Neal, Milan Lucic. Lucic worked out to be the better player for the Flames. It's kind of weird. Neal really went downhill, and the real deal wasn't so much the real deal anymore. But it's not common to see these two teams talk, and we know the Flames are possibly going to go deeper into a rebuild. And a guy like Rasmus Andersson doesn't mean he's going to get moved for sure. But when you look at, we've heard rumblings that Kadri would be willing to go to the right team, the right scenario. He'd be willing to waive, not for just anybody, mind you, but in some scenarios. And you wonder about guys like Uyghur and Anderson, and that Craig Conroy is going to get lots of interest, right? Doesn't mean that he's got to keep some veterans around, and doesn't mean that they all want to leave or anything like that. But you have to think that it's the interest is going to be there. And Rasmus Andersson would be a great fit on a number of teams. Now, that article I did mention briefly also talked about Artem Zub in Ottawa, mentioning if Ottawa doesn't have the season that they want this year, would they consider that? And I was like, well, I guess maybe, right? But you can't say with any certainty. They do rely on Zub a lot. And at this point, they're not having an excess of right shot D or total defenseman on the roster that they can really afford to be moving somebody who's pretty effective. But the other name that was interesting in that article was, and he's just signed a new deal with Montreal, that's Justin Barron, right shot defenseman. Now, we know Montreal has a lot of young D, and that there's bound to be a couple more traded. We've talked about that at great length because there's different rumors that we've heard, and different articles and opinions out there on who will end up being the guys that stay and make up the D-core and who might be the guys to move. For the most part, we've heard a lot about Jordan Harris. We've heard a bit about, maybe Struble. I haven't heard as much about him, but Harris has been a common name out there. To some degree, Barron, but really, then he just signs a 2-year deal. There was some talk about Jack-Eye getting a lot of interest. Again, it seems like Montreal is very much resistant the idea of trading him, so that tells me that they probably don't really want to do that. But I do wonder about Barron. I don't think that Justin Barron's completely untouchable, for sure. There's no reason to think that. And there is some upcoming right shot defensemen that I wonder, maybe not so much right now, but maybe as training camp moves along, as the season starts, would it maybe make sense? And the only way that they would consider a trade for Barron to me is you need to really see a big step forward from Mailloux and Reinbacher, because they're gonna, if Montreal has their way, those are former first round pick right shot defensemen. I'm sure they'd love to see them be, especially Reinbacher being such a high pick, work their way into the Habs lineup between either this year or next year, and be hopefully top 4, definitely top 6 guys for them, right? And there's some wondering if Logan Mailloux might, force a trade by kind of playing really well through camp this year and kind of pushing his way in there. And that would affect a guy like Barron. The only problem is they have tons of defensemen. They just don't have as many right shot. They have David Savard and Justin Barron are the only 2 guys right now with any amount of experience. And Barron doesn't even have a lot of it, right? And then you got your next guys are your Mailloux and your Reinbachers, which we can't say with any certainty that they're ready to play in the NHL, right? If so, and there's talk that maybe Savard gets traded this year, but it's hard to say. It just really leaves the right side thin, or you got a lot of guys playing on their weak side. I don't know. But, could Justin Barron be a target for Edmonton? Yeah, the contract he just signed works for them. They definitely need a new partner to play with Darnell Nurse in that second pair. So I understand the connection. I understand why. It suggests Philip Broberg would be the player that they move for any of these guys. So Broberg for Barron, it gives them the Habs another left shot D. I don't know that they really need that, and same thing in Ottawa. If they traded Zub, they're going to want another right shot defenseman, because they don't grow on trees. They're hard to find. And if you're going to move guys like that, then you're certainly going to be looking to replace them right away if you don't get somebody that fits that description. Now, Calgary's a little bit better positioned to do that right now. But like I said, we don't know that Rasmus Anderson's even on the Flames radar to move. Although I have no doubt that he's getting interest for sure. But does it make sense for Montreal to do that? I don't know that it does. I mean, I like I said, I don't think Barron's off limits. I just don't know that Broberg would be what they would want. To me, it makes more sense. Like they need, if they're going to get more help, to me, it would be a top young, like a younger forward would make more sense, right? We've heard all the links to Patrick Laine and all that kind of stuff. So clearly they're in the market for another younger, offensive type forward. It would be what they'd want. I don't know that Edmonton has one of those that they're willing to part with. So again, I know the Barron for Broberg stuff is in the article. It's out there a little bit. We've seen on the other side of it, especially kind of talking about how this could be something that works. I'm just not convinced Montreal does that. Not to take away from Broberg, proved in the playoffs that he can play. I just don't know that he's really. If you look at Montreal's left side right now, they just signed Goulet to a big extension, right? You get Matheson for a couple more years. I don't think that they're going to trade Matheson anytime soon. And then then you got Jack. I just signed a 2-year deal on the left side, right? So then there's your probably most likely your starting top 3 left D for the start of the season. You got Lane Hudson. I'm not sure where everything is with his development. Is he ready to play or not? So that could force a move. But you got a Hudson that's there, and there's some other guys too. Then you got your Harris and your Strubles. There's lots of left D. They don't need Broberg too. Broberg is not going to be better than all those guys. There's no chance. So to me, that doesn't make sense unless you're offering something else. But what could they offer? They already traded Ryan McLeod. So if you look, there's not maybe a Dylan Holloway for Broberg or for Barron. Sorry, that maybe that works. Holloway's got tons of speed, does have some good upside. That might be something that's more realistic, but not Broberg. But we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.